Good morning from San Diego, and good afternoon to where most of you are tuning in from. Welcome to the latest Ironlights Major League Tournament. I am E. McNeil, the main developer of Ironlights. I'll be your commentator for this tournament today. And as always, we are hopping right into the first match, in this case between Mystic Greninja and Annihilate. Annihilate showing off some of our new cosmetics, that Paladin armor and finned helm on the Dragoon. Mystic Greninja on the Knight. And looks like Mystic Greninja had a very good defense with that first attack coming out from Annihilate. Now going in on attack, able to get a couple more hits and take the slight lead to start us off. I always say in these matches, you can look at that first exchange where both players start off with half a bar of energy, and you can usually use that to sort of set expectations or try to see what the kind of momentum is for the match. In this case, Mystic Greninja coming off to a strong start, Annihilate deciding to try to harass the opponent with several ranged attacks. The Dragoon ranged attack, that sort of thrown javelin attack, can do a ton of damage, but is relatively expensive. Annihilate was able to land one of those hits, though, and in fact, just landed another. Oh, it looks like, I'm sorry, we're not actually seeing the seeing the match on screen right now. Prox, if you can look into that. In the meantime, I'm just going to continue commentating. There we go. So yeah, I mean, nothing happened that I didn't tell you about. So nothing, no harm done. All right, we have Mr. Greninja, the Dragoon, as I was saying before, going in on another melee attack. Fairly short attack, spending a lot of Annihilate's energy on the ranged attacks. Mr. Greninja out for revenge, able to land a small hit there, but not really keeping up that sort of momentum that I was sort of expecting from the very start. However, with a quick charge up and follow up attack, able to land a big double hit there on a headshot against Mystic Greninja. I'm sorry, Mystic Greninja landing that headshot against Annihilate. Able to do some good damage, but leaving a bit of vulnerability there. Annihilate able to get one small hit to take advantage of that vulnerability. For those who are new to the game, vulnerability is that sort of pink part of the health bar that increases when a player charges up energy. But of course, they're doing double damage for all of the health in that area. Mr. Greninja continuing the very aggressive style of quick charge ups and short attacks, able to land a couple of hits, and in fact, very much ahead in this case. But Annihilate choosing to do a different strategy, using a lot of ranged attacks, in this case, changing it up by firing from both the thrown javelin and thrown dagger at the same time, using a little more energy but making it harder to block. And it will land a couple of hits. The advantage of doing so, of course, is every time that Annihilate lands one of those ranged attacks, Mystic Greninja's energy regeneration is arrested. It goes back down to 0. And oh, nice hit there, almost 700 damage from Annihilate's ranged attack. But when Mystic Greninja takes one of those hits from the ranged attack, there's a strong incentive for Mystic Greninja to just go in and try to land a hit of his own with the melee attack. And those short melee attacks that are forced out early, they tend to be a little less efficient use of energy because there's a bit of a cost up front in terms of energy to starting an attack. However, I'm not sure if Mystic Greninja actually cares too much about being forced to do those short melee attacks, because Mystic Greninja seems to have been choosing to do that frequently regardless. That is just a style that some players like to do, of frequent short melee attacks, keeping the opponent on the back foot. And if Mystic Greninja is able to continue this and able to keep landing those hits here and there, it's really adding up. Annihilate at this point is really starting to run out of health. With that buffer going away, Annihilate needs to change the game up. Annihilate does have more energy than we've seen most of these players sitting on, but it was still less than half a bar of energy. On the melee attack, able to land a good 3 hits, but they're not doing as much damage because the Dragoon just isn't able to get the same damage throughput that we can see from the Knight with that big double-bladed greatsword. Another good ranged attack, Annihilate landing more of these attacks than I would have expected. Some of that might be because Mystic Greninja's Knight, the Knight is not really the most defensively oriented uh, weapon or class. That Greatsword, it can be tricky to get all of the blocks in. Nevertheless, Annihilate landing more of these attacks than I would have expected. It's just that Mystic Greninja doesn't have to care as long as they're able to put out more damage in total. And that is what they've been able to do consistently so far. Bit by bit, Mr. Greninja has been chipping away at Annihilate and is successfully putting the match away. Another good hit, but Annihilate, I'm not sure how they're able to sort of, at this point, do enough damage to turn it around. And in fact, Mr. Greninja in the latest melee attack, able to clip Annihilate in the lower body and do enough damage to take round one. Now, for those who might be new to the Major League Tournament format, we'll go over the basics of what's going on here. Each of these matches is going to be a best of 3 match, so Annihilate is not out of this match yet. Annihilate gets to choose one class to ban from their opponent. The most frequent choice is to ban the class that was able to defeat you previously, so Annihilate might choose to ban the Knight. However, sometimes the player who lost a round might think that they have a good counter strategy. Maybe they'd be happy to go against a Knight if they were able to pick some other class that they think can counter it. So there's a tactical choice involved there of how much depth you think your opponent has in terms of what classes they can succeed with, versus what classes you think that you can actually handle. And then after the best of 3 is done, when one of these players has won 2 rounds, then that player who won gets to move on in the upper bracket, but the losing player does not get pushed out of the tournament yet. Instead, we're doing a double elimination tournament, meaning the losing player in the match gets bumped down to the lower bracket and has a chance to fight their way back up to the ultimate finals and be able to take the championship. Now, the Major League Championships like this have for a long time had a consistent reward, which is access to the champion helm, an exclusive cosmetic helm that has a special glow around it, sort of a halo of light that only these champions are able to get. And also, Major League champions get the right to record their own fighter using the animation recording tools in-game, and that fighter gets added to the campaign for all new players to watch or to play against. You'll actually see in the single-player campaign in the Gold League, a lot of those fighters are fan-made characters at this point. In fact, there's so many that as the developer, it's starting to get awkward, and I might run out of space for it. We're also just briefly showing on screen, you might see a couple of cats. I'll explain that in a moment. But until then, we've got to focus on the match. So we have Annihilate switching over to the Duelist with the quick Rapier and Buckler. Mystic Greninja, possibly with the Knight banned, has chosen to switch classes to the Ninja with the dual Katars. This is interesting because we now have 2 different classes that are using dual weapons. And that's very important because Mystic Greninja might not have known what his opponent was going to be using here, but the Duelist is better prepared to block melee attacks from the Ninja than most other classes, especially the classes that only have one weapon, or a double-handed weapon. It's harder for them to have the flexibility to be able to block from attacks that are coming from 2 directions at once. So it is possible that Annihilate feels good about the way that this turned out. However, Annihilate is the one who has used up all of their energy. Mystic Greninja now attacking with a full bar of energy, a nice long melee attack. And even though these are fairly low damaging weapons, and even though Annihilate does have 2 weapons to block with, the Ninja is pretty notorious for being able to just put out this flurry of blows type attack that is almost impossible to fully stop. You're going to take some hits when you have attacks coming at that frequency, from all of those directions. And so after that exchange of melee attacks, Mystic Greninja is sitting on a pretty sizable lead. Annihilate, again, with the harassing ranged attacks, able to block most of the ranged attacks coming from Greninja and landing a good harassing attack there. But the reward is that Mr. Greninja's melee attack is forced out. And in this case, That's not great for Annihilate. Mr. Greninja feeling confident enough to charge up some energy. It's a good bet there as long as Mr. Greninja feels confident in being able to do enough damage with that melee attack to make it all worth it. And so far, they've been able to cash that check. So, despite the significantly effective harassing attacks from Annihilate, Annihilate is spending enough energy on those attacks that there's just not enough ammo left over to really take out Mr. Greninja's health. And health is ultimately how victory is going to be achieved here. Mr. Greninja back on attack, bringing Annihilate down to a fairly small sliver of health. So yeah, despite, again, effective sets of melee attacks from Annihilate, Mr. Greninja is ready to put the match away, goes in for the last melee attack and lands the hit, successfully winning this best of 3. So as described before, that's it for this pairing. Mr. Greninja will move forward in the bracket. Annihilate is not out of this yet. We'll be going down to the lower bracket and continuing the fight, hoping to move onward. You can see the bracket up there on screen right now. Now, okay, I mentioned briefly some cats. I'm a fan of cats. We're all fans of cats here. Specifically, the ones being shown here are from Blitz May. Blitz is on our Discord and just asked the devs if I would be willing to show off some of their cats. These are foster failures primarily. The one you're seeing here is Jelly, the sibling of Peanut Butter. So we'll go back to that in a moment. It looks like we have a match in progress that we can take a look at. So we'll flip over to that. We have, I'm going to pronounce that, Jixie the Merciless and Thick X9. Yeah, X9 and Jixie we've seen on the Discord. Looks like, I'm going to be honest, it's hard to tell which player is which because both of them are using gold accents, and I did not see how this match actually started. So, okay, looks like X9 is the one in the amethyst, whereas Jixie is on the carbon, with the knight armor. X9, unfortunately, that means is really on the back foot there. Playing Crusader, always good to see that class come out. I'm a fan of the flail, makes for a good show. But Jixie the Merciless with the Duelist was able to land a hit there, and it looks like he's backing out of the game. So that was, again, a match in progress, started the same time as our first match. And so we were only catching the very tail end of that, unfortunately. We don't know sort of how the matches are going in progress necessarily. We try to show as much as we can. So back to what I was saying. Blitz sent me some cat pictures, and Blitz has 3 cats named Clark, Peanut Butter, and Jelly. You're seeing Jelly on screen right now, and maybe more cats than that. But Peanut Butter and Jelly are foster failures, and I'm a big fan of that. That's a term for when you agree to foster a kitten. At a certain age, usually from 4 weeks to 8 weeks, the kittens are not quite ready to be adopted out by a shelter, but they do need someone to take care of them, and they don't need to be fed by their mother anymore. So they get fostered by people who volunteer for an animal shelter to take in these kittens and take good care of them for a month. And they're adorable but messy. You have to, sometimes there's health problems and things like that, so it can be tricky. But you're kind of responsible as a foster for kittens to give them a good home and make sure that they get some social exposure and become sort of well-adjusted kittens so that they can get adopted out into their forever families. And it's something that you can look into. It's actually a lot of fun. It's a 1-month commitment. At least at the animal shelter here in San Diego, they give you all of the equipment that you need. And they provide the food and all the vitamins and everything that you would possibly need to take care of them. And my wife and I fostered kittens some time ago, and we had 2 batches, and on the second batch, we became what's called foster failures, which is you foster the kittens for a month, and you're so much in love that you can't bear to give them up, and so you adopt them yourself. And our kittens were named Null and Void. They were 2 black cats that we've shown on stream before. And just to be fair and consistent and to show appreciation for others in that situation, when Blitz sent me pictures of his cats, his foster failures, I thought it would be sweet to show them and share them on stream. So Good on you, Blitz. And yeah, Peanut Butter Jelly, Clark, all very adorable cats. You might see a few more of them over the course of the stream. Okay, it looks like we are just about to start another match here. Looks like we have Ramsey versus Chaos 6 in this case. Um, just taking a quick peek at the bracket. I'm not actually sure where on here we're watching, if this is still the first or second round of the tournament. Round 3? Okay, great. But yes, we have Ramsey versus Chaos 6. It looks like we are in a knight versus knight mirror match, which I'm always a fan of. The mirror matches are nice because they're in some way guaranteed to be fair. You're never going to be able to say that it was because somebody counterpicked your class by luck, by sheer accident, that you won or lost. Chaos 6 also showing off some of that new cosmetics that came out in the latest Armory update. Goes on the attack first, lands a couple of hits. Ramsey, having charged up, getting a nice big long melee attack here, bought himself a lot of time there, able to get a few extra hits in, and so able to take an early lead here against Chaos 6. Ramsey, we've seen in a few other tournaments as well, so definitely an experienced player here. Stepping a little far forward, almost triggering some damage from moving outside of his bounds there. Ironlights, of course, has some real-world bounds that you can't exit to make sure that players don't get too much of an advantage from having a lot of real-world space. You don't want people to be able to just walk 10 feet across the room and be able to hit you, or to be able to step outside of your range. So everybody has to stay within that circle, or else take a little bit of bonus penalty damage. Chaos 6, having charged up a little bit of energy, able to go in, gets a nice 600 damage headshot there. But Ramsey, with the aggressive early attacks and showing off a little bit of spins there with the knight, Ramsey able to get a sizable lead here. Throws out a little ranged attack, but it's not doing much. Chaos choosing not to wait for taking turns, but instead to go in on the attack. You're seeing some dodging behavior from Ramsey. A couple of those fairly effective. There was some question about that in the Ironlights subreddit about the effectiveness of dodging, noticing that a lot of high-level champion players use that kind of strategy. Ramsey, on the attack, effectively able to get enough hits to really persuasively take that first round. Again, best of threes, so Chaos is not out of it yet, can ban that knight away from Ramsey if they so choose. But yeah, there was some questioning about whether dodging is effective, and noticing that it's something that's frequently seen in the high-level players and sort of champion-level players. All right, back into the next round. Looks like, yes, indeed, Chaos is sticking with that knight, and Ramsey is now switching off to a different character, but sticking with the very high damage dual, two-handed weapon, in this case switching to the Berserker with that giant Warhammer. Now, Chaos is effectively blocking a fair number of these, but with these big heavy weapons, you don't need that many hits to get through, and that arguably is more true with a weapon like the Warhammer, because the way that the Berserker's Warhammer works, it has two different hitboxes, sort of like the Greatsword, but one of them, the Hammerhead, actually does a lot more damage. I believe 2/3 of the damage comes just from that part. So even if you're able to block the easier to block part, the handle, the head of the hammer can still do a ton of damage. Now, Ramsey pretty effectively was able to block a lot of that. That's tricky to do with the Berserker because you, again, have to block with both the hammerhead. The counter sort of to, the Berserker's advantage there is that the hammerhead is harder to block with. But now Ramsey going very aggressively, choosing to charge up most of their health bar at this point charged up, but trying to do so much damage that they can regain some of that. Chaos choosing to charge up themselves, see if they can take advantage of the vulnerability, get some damage done, but Ramsey effectively defends, only takes a small amount of damage there, showing a lot of little spins and able to get a couple of little hits with that ranged attack, meaning that Ramsey now is gaining energy at a faster rate. That puts Ramsey in a pretty enviable position in terms of the typical amount of damage done and the ability to just get in the position to do that damage. Chaos able to land a hit and forces Ramsey to take a bit of damage from going outside of those movement bounds. But now Ramsey with almost a full bar of energy, going in on the attack and swooping that hammer around, able to land the big headshot that it takes to finish off Chaos. So that is round 2 of that match. Ramsey will be moving forward. Chaos 6 pushed down into the lower bracket. All right. So that was a round 3 match. Let me take a quick look at this bracket. Yeah. Yeah. Proximo tells me that it's effectively round 2 because there was an odd number of players. Round 1 only included 1 match. So you can think of this as effectively round 2, that both of those players, Chaos 6 previously beat another opponent, as did Ramsey. They moved into round quote unquote 3, and now Ramsey will be moving into round 4. Winner of round 4 gets to get into the upper bracket semifinals. So that would make it the quarterfinals. All right. And if you use the weird terminology we used back in high school debate, that we just saw the octafinals. All right. I'm going to stop talking and start talking about the new match that we just hopped into. We have Goon versus Gagey Loaf. Now, looks like Goon is using the Scourge with the double whips versus Gagey Loaf using the Scythe as the Reaper class. This is notable because this tournament is the first since the Armory update has come out, and, not coincidentally, the first tournament in which we have allowed the 2 latest classes of Dragoon and Scourge. I failed to mention that when we saw the Dragoon earlier, but that is the first time we have seen either Dragoon or, in this case, Scourge in any Major League tournament of Ironlights so far, and we've run quite a few. Goon had a good flurry of blows there, sort of like the ninja, able to put out a lot of attacks because of the dual weapons, but with a little less control over where those attacks come from because of the nature of the whip's physics. Looks like Gagey Loaf was able to successfully block a majority of those. The shield, the Scythe actually has shield bars built into it, and so Gagey Loaf is able to block with both the blade of that Scythe as well as the shield bars on the handle, and has, I was going to say, been defending fairly effectively. However, this attack from Goon is doing a lot of damage, and you heard a couple of whip cracks there. There's kind of a trade-off of going for the speed of attacks with those fairly low damage swiping, whip attacks versus cracking the whip to be able to do a lot of bonus damage. Now, Gagey took a lot of damage there, left Goon with a sizable lead, but then on the attack did a ton of damage there, was able to get around those defenses, and that is really the advantage of the Reaper. That Scythe has such a long blade, it's so tricky to block against. It can really sort of get around most of the defenses you have. Gagey Loaf now, with a little bit less energy, is the one going on the attack. And again, really doing a lot of damage per hit. Big 500 damage headshots counts for a lot, but Goon now has an actual full bar of energy and is going on the attack. Goon, in this case, probably likes these longer attacks because every time that Gagey Loaf blocks with those shield bars, they're going to get a little smaller and it becomes a little harder to block with. So now Goon, able to land more and more hits as the attack goes on, leaves Gagey Loaf almost with the same amount of health. So it's actually a fairly even game, but both players are being very effective on attack. The defense is really not where it's at right now. And now, Gagey Loaf able to successfully defend against those hits with both players showing a lot of vulnerability. That's really what matters here. This is going to be a matter of who can really land those last hits. And Gagey Loaf, with the successful defense, having forced Goon to charge up. It looks like we had a disconnect. That's bad news. That was a really interesting match. Gagey showing both the really good whip cracking and mixing that up with the straight attacks, really effective attacks from the others. But based on what we saw there, it looks like it was just our spectator client that lost connection. I'm going to hope that that's what was the case there. Yeah, we're still seeing the stream, so it doesn't look like, we just completely lost connection. But hopefully that didn't affect the match itself. If that is the case, they might have to do a rematch there. But um, dang, such a good fight there, and hopefully we just missed it instead of that fight having to be thrown out or disqualified. So we'll see if we can hop into that match or another. Um, in the meantime, I just want to say there's another cat on screen. The cat is named Clark. That one's not a foster failure, but it's fluffy and cute. And that's important too. Yeah, I'll take a look in the stream chat. It's usually my habit here to try to answer any questions that come up in chat. Okay, it looks like we are able to hop into another match, though. It is just not the same match that we were seeing before. So give us one moment. Okay, it looks like we have Annihilate versus King. And Annihilate on the Dragoon, King on the Knight. We've seen Annihilate facing against the Knight before, and it is a tricky matchup. And again, I just wanted to say Annihilate, we're seeing using the Dragoon, first Dragoon ever in an Ironlights Major League tournament. And doing that style that we saw before, firing, this is early in this match, but firing the two ranged attacks at the same time. And that can be very difficult to block. So far, King successfully getting those blocks in, though. A couple of those ranged attacks going wide, but one of the throw-in daggers successfully clips Annihilate there. Or sorry, successfully clips King, forces out the melee attack, but King able to get at least a few effective hits here. Some of them getting blocked, but of course the advantage of the Greatsword is it has two blades in one, each of them needing to be blocked separately. So at least a couple of times we've seen Annihilate block one of the hits while the other's able to get through. And especially if that's going to be a headshot or against vulnerability, it can do quite a lot of damage. King chooses to charge up, showing a lot of vulnerability, but knowing that Annihilate doesn't have energy at this point to be able to effectively counterattack means that that's relatively safe. So King, with a long melee attack, does a lot of damage, able to take a huge lead, shows still a ton of vulnerability, that entire health bar, but with some energy left, possibly willing to take that risk, and then takes a hit. The energy regeneration is slowed, meaning it's time to go in on the attack. King back with the melee attack, and with running out of energy just before they're able to finish off Annihilate. Annihilate continuing with the ranged attacks. Some of those might be able to do damage, but in other cases, it might be more effective for forcing out the melee attack, which is just not something that Annihilate can survive at this point with so little health left. Indeed, King able to throw out some ranged attacks, follow up, and finish off Annihilate in that, I believe, first round. Okay. I believe those players are checking in with each other about bans, so hopefully that was the first round of the best of three that we were watching just there. King versus Annihilate. Yes, I believe that we are seeing a lower bracket match because we saw Annihilate fighting earlier. And here we are starting off into the second round of this matchup. Annihilate sticking with the Dragoon. King, possibly with that Knight band, switching into Samurai. Another double-bladed sword, but one that works quite differently. And in a way that might matter quite a lot here. King with the melee attack. The big difference that we're seeing right now with Annihilate on defense is that if Annihilate is able to block one blade, they're blocking all the damage. Because unlike against the Knight's Greatsword, the Samurai's Katana only has one blade. It does more damage, it's faster, it's harder to block. But if you can block it, for instance, with that big old glaive or parrying dagger, that's it, that's all the damage. And then on defense, King is going to be needing to block either with the blade or the shield bars that are built into the handle of that katana. So yeah, I think really what we're going to see is it's a matter of Annihilate's defense right here. If Annihilate is able to block a significant number of these attacks, then Annihilate is in a much better position than they were against the Knight. King doing an interesting move there, running out of energy, going back, immediately choosing to charge up and attack again. A similar dynamic perhaps to what we saw in the previous match, where King is looking at how much energy Annihilate has on hand and choosing whether or not to charge up based on that, based on how much it could get punished for showing vulnerability at that point. Annihilate continuing to throw a large number of ranged attacks. When they're able to land those attacks, they can stop King's melee regeneration and force it to slow down, have to build up again. That can be effective, but only really if you are able to hit enough attacks or hit them quickly enough such that you're spending less energy than you're costing your opponent. And that cost can be measured both in the time it takes them to charge up or the efficiency cost of forcing them to do a melee attack. So I feel like Annihilate is able to land the hits, but we're seeing a pretty effective defense from King. And there's always two parts to this formula, the offense and the defense. Because King was effectively defending those melee attacks, they haven't been efficient, meaning that King has been slowed down, but not to an appreciable extent that it's going to be able to turn the tide of the match here. Annihilate on the back foot, unfortunately. King sitting on a full bar of energy. I'm not sure if King notices that because there's not much of an incentive to wait here. It's letting Annihilate get a little bit more time, a little bit of sort of free energy regeneration. And Annihilate indeed chooses not to wait their turn, goes in on the attack, able to land a couple of hits here against King, but primarily to the lower body where it's doing less damage. Attacks to the legs, they do 30% less damage than normal. Normal is what you get when you hit the torso or shoulders. Headshots do 50% extra for those who haven't heard the numbers yet. King back on the attack. These big sort of flippy style, twisting katana attacks. Runs out of energy just before being able to finish off the fight. But with such a huge bar of health and little vulnerability shown so far, King could afford to charge up and finish it off. Instead, choosing to try to throw out some ranged attacks, possibly trying to get the last hit in a certain style that they're looking for. But Annihilate, choosing not to just let this happen, goes in on the attack and gets this last melee attack in. King successfully able to defend those hits, though. And at this point, with King sitting on a full bar of energy, I'm afraid the match is basically over. Annihilate sees it, but in good competitive style, is defending, blocks the first few hits, but takes the hit that they can't afford. Annihilate, therefore, knocked out of the match, and this being a lower bracket game, knocked out of the tournament. King gets to move forward then, and will be moving forward in the lower bracket. Oh, I see. I wasn't looking in the right place. This was the lower bracket round 1. So a tricky situation, meaning both of these players, they have longer periods to, a longer fight, more matches that they have to get through than really any other. So King showing a pretty good play there. In the upper bracket, they lost their match against Goon, who we were able to see was an effective fighter in their own right. And so King has a shot here, but has a lot of rounds still to get through. So good play to Annihilate. It was great seeing you in the tournament. Loved the ranged attacks there, and good to see the very first Dragoon ever. But King will be the one moving forward in the lower bracket. All right, and I was just speaking about Goon, and here we get a chance to see him in action again up against Gageloaf. Goon showing us the Scourge. Always happy to see that. Gageloaf on the Samurai. So this is not a matchup we've seen yet so far, but I am very curious about the effectiveness of the Scourge in these matches. And, oh my goodness, did I miss something here? Are we... it looks like Goon has quite a bit of damage already taken. We must have been going into a match that's already in effect, or something like that. But yeah, Goon on the Scourge does a good amount of damage with that first melee attack. And Gageloaf waiting to charge up a fair amount of energy. Looks like both of them had just done that sort of first back and forth, and it was a fairly even one at that. Goon has an interesting challenge here of blocking with those whips. That can be tricky, and indeed, Gagey gets an enormous amount of damage with some of those headshots. Goon's going to have a tricky job blocking because the katana is quite fast as a weapon and is generally able to get in position to, to attack or block where it needs to. Unfortunately, it can only be in one place at a time, so Goon needs to use the fact that he's got two weapons to his advantage and was able to mostly even things out, but Gagey still sitting on a slight lead here and with a little bit faster energy regeneration right now. With the energy about even and only a slight lead in health, chooses to go in on the attack, getting another of those big, almost 700 damage headshots. Goon really has to be careful about sort of whether they're going to focus on blocking the headshots, which are doing basically twice as much damage as the hits to the lower body, or to try to be flexible and go where the attacks are coming. There's really a case to be made for both that sort of either ambitious or conservative style of defense. Again, on the attack, Goon able to land a lot of damage, but Gagey still at the end of it sitting on a slight lead, both in health and in terms of energy. Goon really in a tricky position because they need to somehow mix it up. Tried to throw out, I believe, a couple of whip cracks there for the bonus damage, but they weren't able to land. Successful defense from Gagey and then the follow-up defense, was unfortunately Gagey taking some damage, but not enough for it to truly stop them. And then with a quick charge up, an effective melee attack gets another of those big headshots. And man, the samurai able to just do so much damage per hit there. It's really something scary when you're facing up against an effective, experienced samurai. I really love seeing the Scourge coming out from Goon, though, so I'm hoping that that is not the end of what we'll see from Goon or maybe other Scourges. But Gagey yes, taking that game, and it looks like that was the round or game 3 or game 2 perhaps of that match. So that is the end there. An upper bracket match, so Goon is still going to be competing, but Gagey is the one who gets to move forward to the quarterfinals in the upper bracket, up against, I believe, Ranzi. So maybe we'll get to see that one in a bit. We are seeing, as you see on screen, there's a tradition that I'm happy to answer any questions that get posted in chat. I'm going to say I usually have trouble sort of keeping up with the ones that are getting posted because I'm mostly focusing on commentating. But because of that, instead of me scrolling up and trying to read through everything, go ahead and repost any questions that you have from this point forward if you've posted any up to now, and I'll try to answer as I see them. In the meantime, I'll focus on the obvious question, which is, who is the adorable kitten who's on screen? This is Peanut Butter, the sibling to Jelly, who, as I mentioned before, is a foster failure belonging to Blitz, Blitzmay, one of our Discord community members. All right, we have a question from Kai asking, how's Ironlights 2? Ironlights 2, I would say, I'm actually feeling very good about right now. But it's a mixed bag, good and bad news from your perspective, which is the bad news is that it's kind of a bigger project or going slower than I wanted. I really started working on Ironlights 2 in a significant way as far back as February. Really got into it, after we were done with the previous update, the Ultimate update, and took a fairly significant break from it to do the Armory update, which means that despite the fact that I'm working with a friend, Jack, who's full-time on Ironlights 2, it's all been going slower than I expected. And we're still in pure prototype phase, meaning that all the stuff that we're doing is just figuring out what we want the game to be rather than building the game itself. Once we enter full production, that means we're going to throw the prototype code away and pick out the bits that we want, but basically starting over to build the game in full. The good news is that the prototype itself is going interestingly. And Boygabe asks what's my favorite thing about Ironlights 2. I will tell you more about that after the next match, because it looks like we have connected to a new match and we're just waiting for these two players to pick their classes. So I want to make sure that I don't shortchange the folks who are actually playing the games, and that's what you're here to watch. So, one moment, we're going to focus on this match, Ramsey versus Gagey just as I was mentioning coming up, and I'll talk a little bit more about Ironlights 2 after that when we have our next pause. Now, both of these players we have now seen fighting before, but it makes sense that the winners in the previous matches we were watching, we're going to get to see again and again. They're, as I said, in the upper bracket quarterfinals here. Ramsey showing us the Knight and Gagey on the Samurai. Both two-headed swords, and for some reason, I always like the sword versus sword matches, whether you're talking duelist, samurai, or knight. But they do play quite differently. And even on blocking, Gagey, in order to successfully block both blades of the knight, has to be there with the base of the katana so that one of those blades can get blocked by the shield bars that are built in there. And so far, that might be proving tricky. Ramsey able to get several double hits in. Gagey, though, with a full bar of energy, now gets a chance for revenge. And the Knight does not have a significant advantage here on defense. The advantage they do have is that they can block twice, once with each of the collision boxes that are part of that greatsword before having to reload. But in terms of pure physics, the Samurai really does have an advantage, only needing to land one hit and having a significant advantage in terms of sheer speed. Ramsey chooses to charge up and go for a quick attack and then do it again. Because the shield bars are part of the katana's weapon design, possibly Ramsey is going for the classic aggressive strategy of all this attack up front. Several attacks together are big attacks such that you can break down the shield bars and make it harder and harder to defend. Gagey doing a quick charge up of their own, getting a good hit in a nice big headshot against Ramsey's vulnerability. That can do a lot of damage. In fact, it might not have even been a headshot, being able to get over 600 damage just against the body. But yeah, and we're seeing almost 500 damage. There it is, the 1,000 damage headshot. That's what I was looking for. The Samurai can just do so much against a vulnerable opponent. But that doesn't distract from the fact that Ramsey has a big lead here. That Knight can be so effective when you're able to get the big hits in. And the more that Ramsey is able to break down the shield bars on the katana, the harder it is to prevent those big hits from coming out. And so, yeah, it's at that point, the momentum is so strong. It's a kind of a feedback loop there. That first attack can do some damage and then really open up a window of opportunity. And then you have to keep charging up to pursue that, to get through that window. Gagey switching to the Reaper. An interesting choice here, switching out of the Samurai. Ramsey, possibly with the Knight band, is switching, as I believe we've seen before, to the other big heavy weapon class, probably the most similar in terms of mechanics to the Knight. Again, something that you have to kind of block both of the parts of the weapon, in this case, the handle and the head of the hammer. And again, a class known really for damage throughput. Gagey, by choosing the Reaper, is picking a class that is very different from the Samurai in some ways, but also in kind of the same way, conceptually similar, where it's a class that has one blade and shield bars built in and is a two-handed weapon. It just plays out so differently, I feel, where the Scythe in this case, it's more about being able to sneak around the opponent and less about absolute speed and huge damage. So Ramsey with a fairly effective defense. We saw at the very end, the tail end of that attack from Gagey, Ramsey did a really fun little dodge, jumping forward and backwards, and showing a little frustration there from Gagey in return. But Gagey now on the attack, both players sitting on a good amount of energy. And yeah, Gagey able to get at least a good headshot in there. You saw a little 0 damage hit. That represents when the weapon would have tried to recharge while inside an opponent. Because we don't want insta-hits like that, those get zeroed out. And so you kind of have to make sure that you're far enough away from your opponent before you try to reload. Not especially consequential, though. So Ramsey, with the retaliation, using that full bar of energy that they had stored up, able to do a good amount of damage, and we saw a big headshot at the tail end of that. Then both players charging up, Gagilov getting the jump on Ramsey and able to get a good hit against the vulnerability, but leaving some vulnerability of their own, and now Ramsey choosing to charge up, um, able to just barely get one hit in there, and then following up with something a little bit more effective, able to take out Gage's vulnerability, leaving still a little bit of their own. Gagilov doesn't have a ton of energy to retaliate against that, and that vulnerability does disappear slowly over time. So it's now a question of when Gage is ready to go in on the attack, able to successfully block the ranged attack that came out from Ramsey, and then do a couple of hits, get a bit of extra damage, probably 300 extra damage or so, based on that vulnerability. And yeah, a few good hits here, but Ramsey is not making it easy. Using this style of sort of moving forward and backwards, that can be very tricky for a scythe that has kind of a certain point along that forward-backward z-axis that they need to hit with, because that's where their blade is. That's the distance that they really want to hit at. Ramsey getting a ton of hits in brings Gagilov down to basically 0 health remaining. Just a sliver there, not even visible, at least on my screen, and is showing that they're ready for the final hit, the coup de grace, and Ramsey comes forward and pokes him with the handle of that Warhammer. That would be the final hit. Ramsey takes the match 2-0. Wow, yeah, we just saw Gagilov really effectively winning against Goon. So Ramsey showing a lot of skill here, making it onto the upper bracket semifinals in a very good position, I think, to try to take, at least get to the finals and take the tournament. We'll have to see how others proceed. It looks like the bracket's in a maybe a bit of a backed up state. We have a couple of matches that we're still waiting on results for. So others are still going to have, we're not quite clear who's going to be able to fight against him in the semifinals yet. But yeah, there's still a lot of this tournament to figure out. And of course, a lot of the lower bracket to get through. So a lot of people still ready with second chances here. Okay. I'm going to turn around and try to answer the question that was asked before I got cut off there to actually do my job and commentate the tournament. There were questions about Ironlights 2. So yeah, for those who don't know, Ironlights 2 is kind of the code name for the sequel or spin-off that I'm currently working on that's designed to take some of the lessons learned from Ironlights and apply it to a new game. Not planning to be a direct sequel. It's not going to be like a dueling fighting game, 1v1. The plan is to do a 4-player co-op style roguelike type of game where you and your party can use Ironlights type weapons and others to fight your way through groups of enemies and, sort of proceed in a more RPG type style, action RPG type game. So, yeah, Kai was asking how it's going. Boy Gabe asks what's my favorite thing about Ironlights 2. I have a good answer now, which is in the last couple of weeks, the vision for how Ironlights 2 will work has started to solidify in a way that it hasn't up to this point. There's some sort of core ideas of Ironlights 2 that of like how I wanted it to proceed or what the point of it was, but there wasn't a clear structure to it or like an understanding of how it would all fit together. There were just sort of different ideas that we knew could fit together if we figured it out. So we started trying to figure out the progression system of the game of, if you beat an encounter, you defeated some enemies, what would that mean? How would you upgrade your character or whatever? And, what rewards would you get? How would it move forward and all tie together? And I really like the idea of having a system that's very flexible and that has a lot of opportunity to sort of go in different directions and that can express a lot of different sort of fantasies of combat. In some way, that's the similarity to Ironlights, where the different classes in Ironlights are sort of different ideas, in my head at least, of what a cool fantasy fighter could be like. We want you to sort of be able to build that in Ironlights 2 over the course of a run through the game. So how to describe it? The core is starting off choosing a weapon, but it's just kind of a weapon. It doesn't have a lot built into it like an Ironlights. Gagelof asks, so it's like a roguelite? Yes, basically like a roguelite sort of formula. Our biggest inspiration is Hades. So like in Hades, you choose a weapon at the start and it gives you some of your basic mechanics, but it changes and it's not the core of your build. A lot depends on what upgrades and sort of abilities you gain along the way. We're going for a similar dynamic. So at the beginning, you might choose between, a mace and shield versus a bastard sword versus a big two-handed axe versus a short bow versus a wand for spellcasting. Right now, I think that's going to be sort of that initial choice. But that's just kind of your level 1 character. And then as you progress, there'll be sort of 2 big types of upgrades. One of them are different bonuses you can get to different types of attacks. Meaning, you could imagine stuff like the first hit against an enemy gets a ton of bonus damage, or you can apply poison damage over time that doesn't stack, or you can get better mobilities, where like you can jump around a lot, double jump or be able to sprint a little bit, or defensive abilities like, you have armor that protects you against weak attacks or higher HP. And then there's another type of upgrade that would be more focused on the weapons themselves, meaning, let's say you start off with the, bastard sword, you could choose to upgrade from there to a different, something similar like a claymore, or to a, something a little different like longsword and shield, or something heavier like, the big warhammer. And then later you can upgrade from that to something more specialized and more powerful. And so over the course of 2 to 3 upgrades, you would be able to kind of specialize into a particular type of weapon and a particular set of bonuses that kind of define that build. And we sort of have like an outline now for how the game could actually function. And Jack and I, over the course of the last week or so, we've been rapidly prototyping what those actually look like. So basically, the game itself doesn't really exist. It's still just a prototype sandbox. But what we can do is, we have just like a little arena where we can spawn enemies to simulate an encounter. And so, we spawn a bunch of random enemies and we assign ourselves just, in this case from a menu, we don't upgrade, but we can just give ourselves however many upgrades and weapons we want. And by doing this manually, we can test out like different constraints and systems. So we can say like, all right, this time we're going to set the difficulty to be X. It's going to spawn this many enemies of these types. And then let's give ourselves, 6 points to distribute of how, what upgrades we want to take. And so, for instance, I made like the most basic ranged weapon to test the other day, and for Ironlights 2, I made, a crossbow, which basically just means, it's a model of a crossbow, and when you click a button, there's a little cooldown time, but you click a button and it shoots an arrow, and if the arrow hits an enemy, then they take some damage. Super basic to implement. Obviously, we're going to want like a real proper bow and stuff for the real game, but it's enough for us to test stuff out. And so then, we give ourselves like an allotment of points just to test stuff out. So like I say, okay, I get 6 points that I can use to give myself bonuses or upgrades. I'm going to pick, multi-shot, which splits my arrow into 3. And then on top of that, I'm going to pick like an explosive arrow as another upgrade so that they blow up. And now I'm like a cluster bomber archer. Or, I'm going to pick a crossbow, a lighter crossbow, but I'm going to take bonuses that make it fire, heavier shots that are slower and do more damage. And then I'm going to combine that with an upgrade that gives me really long range, fast shots. So now I'm like a sniper character that can fight from really long range. Or I'm going to pick an ability that gives me a lot of mobility so that I can jump around the battlefield and avoid getting locked down by opponents. And I'm going to take, an upgrade that gives me very quick firing shots. So now I can kind of hop around and like rapid fire the opponents. And so, finally, like I feel like you can creatively express different builds within the systems that are in game. And that's a key part of the Ironlights 2 vision. All right, that was a long-winded response, and I'll answer more questions later. Feel free to post them now, but it looks like we have connected to a new match, and so we're just waiting for them to pick their weapons. But it looks like they've just done so, so I'm going to avoid talking more and address what's happening in this match. Looks like we have Jixie the Merciless versus Mystic Greninja. So This is a round 3 match. We're still sort of catching up, but this is in the upper bracket. We have seen these players fighting before. Mr. Greninja we saw in our very first match against Annihilate and showing us those Katars for the Ninja again. Jixie the Merciless we saw fighting X9 and is starting off on the Knight. And it looks like for the first time we are showing off the Volcanic match. Or I'm sorry, the Volcanic Weather stage. This is one of the new weather stages along with the Snowstorm that was introduced in the Ironlights Armory update. Very fiery in comparison. There's no actual volcano. It's just the volcanic sort of area. But I'll stop talking about that and address what's actually happening in game. Jixie started off on attack and was able to get some big hits in against Mystic Greninja. Greninja able to block in 2 places at once, but needs to keep those Katars together in order to be able to block both hits from the Greatsword. So there is a trade-off there. You know, sometimes you might want to have more flexibility, more chance of blocking one blade, but it's still quite difficult to block both of them. Jixie able to do quite a lot of damage, therefore, in that first attack. Then chooses to charge up and go in for another attack. When the opponent doesn't have shield bars, the charging up and frequent attacks has less of a sort of feedback loop bonus to it. You can't weaken the opponent and then take advantage of that weakness. The Ninja is going to be just as fine now as at any point in the past. But Jixie so far has been pretty effective at getting those hits in, and a very impressive defense there against Mystic Greninja. We saw Greninja in a previous fight able to get a ton of hits in with that sort of flurry of blows style. Looks like Mr. Greninja took a hit there from the ranged attack and has not gone on the melee attack, just did so. But during that time, after Mr. Greninja took the hit from the ranged attack and didn't return any damage, that was a situation in which Jixie was gaining energy at a much faster rate, and so was able to get a little bit of an energy advantage there. Greninja takes a little bit of damage from the melee attack, and Jixie indeed charges up again, goes in on the attack, and gets a couple of big double hits there. I think we're seeing a very agile style on a not very agile weapon from Jixie the Merciless. Merciless indeed, getting a lot of double hits in, and in fact, finishing it off with a big headshot there. Greninja having a very difficult time blocking the damage coming out from Jixie. That will be round 1, and we're going to see what happens here. The Knight really has shown a lot of power in this tournament, and a lot of the time, I'm not going to say that that's because the Knight is overpowered or anything like that, because this is a limited set of data points. I'm not even seeing all of the matches that are taking place this tournament. But I will say, sometimes we don't actually get a good glimpse of how the different classes balance against each other until we see them used in a tournament setting. Because this is really when you know that the data is more valid, when you have players who are trying their best, who are high-level players. When you're looking at data, as I often do, from what's happening in public games, oftentimes you don't know when people are trying their hardest versus, for instance, picking classes that they're trying to train up, to get better at, or sometimes just messing around, even in ranked games. Tournaments, it's definitely where the rubber hits the road. So in round 2, Mr. Greninja switching out of the Ninja onto Knight and going at a pretty aggressive clip here. This might be that sort of aggressive style that I was talking about before. Mr. Greninja attacking several times to try to break down the shield bars on Jixie the Merciless's side, because Jixie has switched out from Knight to Reaper. However, it looks like Jixie has successfully defended against a lot of these hits so far, and although there's kind of a, trade-off there, if you're taking hits on the shield, then that is breaking down your shield. It's still better there than taking those hits to the body and actually losing HP. And Jixie on attack, a very effective melee attack in the last set, able to get a ton of damage down on Mr. Greninja. Mr. Greninja still charging up a fair amount and left a bit of vulnerability, took it out, giving a little bit of a cheeky shot towards the camera there. But yeah, Jixie surprisingly effective here on attack. Maybe not surprising, I should say, because the Reaper is known for being tricky to block, and the Greatsword is really not the best equipped to block against it. The Greatsword, although it does have a good length to it, its cross section, its breadth is not enormous. And when you have a blade from the scythe coming in, it's more of just a point that you're trying to block against. Having a big, long but slow sword is not very effective against blocking that shape of weapon. Mr. Greninja with another quick charge up and attack, trying to take advantage, I believe, of the vulnerability on Jixie, and indeed able to land the hits, get the extra damage done. But at what cost? In this case, Mr. Greninja left with little energy and a bit of vulnerability still left. Jixie not taking advantage of it at this point, and Mystic instead choosing to go in and attack it once again without charging up, but with little energy left. That means Jixie feels more safe to charge up themselves. Gets a bit extra energy, goes in on the attack. Another mechanic that I haven't repeated yet, but will be familiar to those who have played a lot of Ironlights. If you have vulnerability on your health bar, that can get regenerated by doing damage. So you can charge up and then do enough damage to heal the vulnerability that you've incurred. And if you can do that, then there's no reason not to charge up. It just becomes free energy. But it's sort of a test. It's like how much damage are you sure you can do with the amount of energy you have? So here, Jixie, for instance, might be hoping to do enough damage to heal that up. In this case, with Mr. Greninja, only a little bit of health left. Really, on their last legs, Jixie the Merciless coming in for the final attack, and with that big chop of the scythe, able to finish the fight. So Jixie taking round 2 against Mystic Greninja. Mystic Greninja is now going to be pushed down into the lower bracket against the Gilded Gladiator. Not sure if that's their in-game name, but that means that Jixie the Merciless will be moving forward against JD Bradley in our bracket. Okay. If we're going to be, it's going to be up to Prox whether we follow the upper or lower brackets, so I'm ready for anything. But in the upper bracket, we always try to let the players have, at least a couple of minutes to catch their breath if they need it. So we might not be getting right into another match. But in the meantime, I'm going to check the stream chat again and see if there's any other questions that people have for me about Ironlights 2 or anything else about Ironlights development. Ocula B asks, E, are you good at Among Us? Truth is, I've never played Among Us, which is maybe a little bit weird for me because I'm a huge fan of social deduction games like that. My favorite board game is One Night Ultimate Werewolf, which is a weird sounding game, but if you've never played it, I mean, it's a masterpiece. You should really get it. One Night Ultimate Werewolf. It's a social deduction game. It's, the Among Us that's good for playing just in a group of people, in real life. But Among Us, I don't like playing those kind of games publicly because the culture of like a public Among Us game, I've seen streams and stuff and it just doesn't seem appealing. And I never actually just had the luck of, having a group of friends that was playing Among Us that I could sort of hop in on. I love the game though. I've seen a ton of streams. I watched a lot of Disguised Toast when he was playing that. KG Loaf, talking about Ironlights 2, says it reminds him of Until You Fall. Is it inspired by it? No, not directly. I mean, I think that Until You Fall had similar ideas, which is sword fighting in VR is awesome. And also roguelikes are a great format, especially for smaller indie developers. And Until You Fall was made by Shell Games, who I very much respect. It's a studio led by Jesse Shell, who I actually very briefly had as a teacher in a summer game design program that I did. But yeah, he's always been a really cool game designer. And Until You Fall is actually a very cool game. Jack, my co-developer on Ironlights 2, is a fan of it. He's played a lot more than I have. There's definitely parts of Until You Fall that I think are really well done and appeal to me. But the reason that I made Ironlights and the reason that I'm making Ironlights 2 is because none of the sword fighting games that exist right now, possibly excepting Ironlights, really, sort of get what I want out of the experience. There's sort of a certain The way that I sometimes explain my approach to game design is that I have a certain vision or fantasy or idea that I think is really neat. And the goal is trying to explain that or share that with others. It's trying to say, no, but this is actually really cool. This is actually really fun. And if you would just, if you would play this game, if I could just show you, then you would feel that too. So Until You Fall, it's possible that they're just going for sort of a different fantasy that isn't naturally as appealing to me, or just that didn't connect with me in some way. And that's not a criticism, because I think Until You Fall is a great game, and so are the other competitors of Ironlights, or other sort of kind of sword fighting games, Blade and Sorcery, Swords of Gura. They're all games that Ironlights gets compared to, and they're all good games. But I think they're all very different. Swords of Gura is so different from Blade and Sorcery, is so different from Until You Fall, is so different from Ironlights. Ironlights 2, similarly, kind of is going to stand a little bit apart. Though I should also say, part of the point of Ironlights 2, and I know I'm getting off track from your question, part of the point of Ironlights 2 is carrying on that sort of vision from Ironlights 1 that didn't connect in some ways. And just to indulge myself, I'll go on a little bit more about what I mean by that. In Ironlights 1, there's a certain feeling of sword fighting that felt, kind of tactical sword fighting where you can see what's happening and kind of get the skill of it, and it feels like it flows and it feels organic, that I really wanted to capture. And I feel like I succeeded, but I did so by using a lot of formalized mechanics that are a bit awkward. And there's a lot of people for whom that just didn't really work for them, where they got into Ironlights and they said, why does it go into slow-mo? Why do I have to stand apart from my opponent? Why do we take turns who's attacking and defending? It was too much of a barrier. They bounced off of it. And I think there's good answers to all of those questions, but also ultimately it's my responsibility to, deliver something that makes sense to the player. And I want to try to do that in Ironlights 2 with a little less, of that sort of overly formalized mechanical rule stuff. All right, enough about me. I'm going to switch to talking about what is happening on stream. We have another match starting between JD Bradley and Jixie the Merciless. This is going to be our other quarterfinals match. And we have JD Bradley on the Berserker with the Warhammer versus Jixie the Merciless, again showing us that effective knight that we've seen coming out from several players. Two big heavy weapons. It seems like that is kind of a theme that we're seeing. Heavy weapons have been doing very well in this match, and maybe that makes sense, where you might expect that heavy weapons would be something that's like maybe good for really new players, and then also good for really experienced players who are able to sort of work around the limitations of the physics and really sort of explore the possible throughput of that damage. Jixie with a very effective first attack takes a big chunk of damage out from JD Bradley. JD Bradley able to get a few hits in against Jixie the Merciless, but not adding up to quite the same amount. Jixie throws out a few ranged attacks, including this the ranged attack. There's that kind of cool technique of throwing out a ranged attack on the knight that lands the same time as your melee attack, forcing the player to split their attention between them. Always interesting to see. JD Bradley, again on the attack, able to land one hit against Jixie's vulnerability, but only that one hit, a really effective defense with the greatsword from Jixie the Merciless, which, I think really adds up to a lot. Oh, and it looks like, JD Bradley, I'm not sure what was happening there, sort of maybe just doing a gesture, but took a bit of damage from going too low, sort of outside those movement bounds, and therefore sort of forced a melee attack out from himself. These interesting spinning attacks sort of from the wrist from Jixie the Merciless. Difficult to anticipate, and getting around some of JD Bradley's defenses. A really fast pace of attacks coming out from Jixie, and with a weapon that does so much damage per hit, that means really high potential throughput of damage. JD Bradley, with that Warhammer, it's using the handle to block is relatively easy and effective, but it's still only one hitbox, meaning that it's going to be a lot less effective on defense against a knight than it would be against, for instance, a samurai. In this case, it's just not something that JD Bradley could afford to let those hits come through. Jixi the Merciless takes round one with still over 2/3 of health remaining. It's a tricky fight there. Jixi the Merciless's knight has been burning through a lot of fights here very effectively. We're going to see how JD Bradley tries to adjust to that. JD Bradley has already won 2 previous matches against John and Oh Yeah. Some of those, Oh Yeah, definitely a experienced player who we've seen fight well in previous tournaments. So JD Bradley has shown a lot of skill getting to this point. Jixi the Merciless, we've seen firsthand in this tournament, really effectively chewing through opponents with that Knight Sword especially. So yeah, we're going to have to see what happens. Possibly JD Bradley could choose to counterpick the Knight, but the classic thing to do here would be to try to ban that Knight, and then Jixi might pull out a Berserker or something to that effect. Let's see what happens. Round 2 starting. Interestingly, Jixi is switching to Duelist, and JD Bradley is sticking with the Warhammer, with the Berserker. A very interesting change up here. Now, we're seeing a very sort of a weirdly, I guess, aggressive defense from Jixi the Merciless. He's swinging with the rapier to block the handle of JD Bradley's Warhammer, and then trying to use the buckler, that shield, to block the head. And it's so far been fairly effective. Now, JD Bradley, however, had a fairly effective defense here. Jixi not out of energy and chooses to charge up a bit as well. And Jixi indeed doing more damage than we saw JD Bradley able to do in that attack. But the dynamic is different here in an important way, which is JD Bradley with the Berserker, as I talked about in the previous match, has the big handle of that Berserker, of that Warhammer, to block with. And if the opponent only has one attacking hitbox, in this case the blade of that rapier, that means that you can block with greater effect. If you can just block with the handle, then you've done all the blocking you need to do. So JD Bradley with a more effective defense, however, that needs to be combined with a more effective attack. And that's going to be difficult when Jixi is so skillfully blocking here. We're seeing again and again Jixi blocking with the rapier, very early in the attack when, it's really just starting. And that's going to be tough because, if you're able to block the, half of the damage, or rather a third of the damage coming out before the swing has really come in, it leaves sort of a separate time for attention to go towards the hammerhead against the buckler. Yeah, Jixi, again on attack, able to land hits. The other dynamic that's important here is that the rapier is one of the fastest weapons in the game. So despite it only being one blade, it might be tricky for JD Bradley to get any part of that Warhammer in the right position in the right time. Jixi choosing to charge up big time. No vulnerability on JD Bradley here. So I think maybe Jixi is hoping to either remain safe because of the limited energy that JD Bradley is sitting on, or to do enough damage to heal a fair amount of that vulnerability. Vulnerability is a dangerous thing when you're fighting a Berserker, though, because, yes, JD Bradley chooses to charge up, only needs a couple of big hits here in order to do enough damage to really heal up that vulnerability. Able to get a big plus 700 damage headshot. Does a lot of damage there. Might not have even been a headshot now that I think of it. But yeah, a ton of damage per hit, yet it's not really going to be enough in total. JD Bradley needs to be able to get more hits to come through in order to turn the tide of this match. Jixi the Merciless living up to that moniker. Again, some effective defense from JD Bradley, blocking a fair number of those hits with the bigger, heavier weapon, but not able to block all of them. And this is a case where, despite the sort of big, high damage throughput Warhammer, we're not seeing a match where damage is coming out at an enormous rate. There's not like a fire hose of damage coming out. Instead, what we're seeing is both players defending effectively and relatively small amounts of damage per attack coming out. And so it's just a chip, chip, chip. at those health bars, and JD Bradley, sadly, getting chipped away more consistently and at a faster rate. Jixie the Merciless now with 2 to 3 times more health left on that health bar, choosing to charge up, showing a lot of confidence here. And with a couple of headshots, able to do a lot of damage with that rapier. The Duelist, we haven't seen used that much this tournament so far. But yeah, kind of a surprise pick, I would say, from Jixie, and proving fairly effective here. JD Bradley choosing to charge up with that last bit of health, going in on the attack, but not able to land a hit. Jixie, therefore, keeping a good pace of energy regeneration, going in for the attack, doing a sort of tricky, like attacking, stopping, attacking, trying to mix up the rhythm and make it harder to defend against. These tournaments, you can try to get a sense of where they're going to be most dangerous. Okay, I'm going to switch back to checking out the stream chat. Oh, it looks like we see. Uh, sorry, B. I'm seeing in the chat you said audio cut out. Can you still hear me? It sounds, Prox. It sounds like audio might be gone. Okay, are we back? Okay, Knowledge Leaf says we got you now. Hey everybody, no worries. Okay, yes. So I'm going to try to scroll up a bit, see if anybody's got other questions about Ironlights 2 or other stuff. Kai says Ironlights 2 hype. Yes, I don't want to hype too much because, man, I don't want to like get you excited for stuff when I'm not going to be able to deliver, something playable for quite some time still. Knowledge Leaf asks, what is Ironlights 2? Yeah, Ironlights 2 is the planned sequel or spin-off of Ironlights. A very different game, so I don't want to call it, straight sequel. Ironlights 2 is kind of a placeholder name. But the plan is to make a game that uses some of the melee mechanics or ideas and definitely some of the art from Ironlights 1, but is formatted as a 4-player co-op multiplayer experience of sort of a roguelike action game where you fight different enemies, construct a build, upgrading along the way, get better weapons, etc., and can kind of progress in a more co-op player versus enemy, NPC type style. Very much not focused on the 1v1 and more focused on sort of a wider set of different types of mechanics and builds. Along those lines, Boy Gabe asks, have you developed Magic and Ironlights 2? And as others said, as B said in the chat, yes, we, it's still something that potentially could be cut at some point. But the plan is to have like a whole spellcasting system in the game. Jack spent a long time working on that, and we have a spellcasting system based on gestures that we're very happy with. And it's sort of a combination of, a mana resource, cooldowns on different spells, and then executing those spells via gestures that range from quite simple, of the sort that, are used in some other games at this point, to very complex, where the idea would be that, you can cast a spell without knowing it ahead of time. You can sort of follow instructions for how to do it, but the point of it is that you can have these big complex gestures that if you memorize them and you practice them, you can cast quicker and more effectively. So there's kind of a skill component involved with this gestural spellcasting system. And we're excited about what that could mean. Okay. I'm going to switch out from that and start talking about the semifinals in the upper bracket that we have right now between Ranzi and Jixie the Merciless. Both players that we've seen before and have really impressed with the skill they've shown. Very convincing wins for both of them. And both of them really showing the power of the Knight. So here we have a Knight mirror match in the new Volcanic stage between Jixi and Ranzi. Jixi with the starting attack, able to land some big hits right off the bat. Not a ton, but charged up, I believe, and are able to do some damage based on that. Does a little bit of damage against Ranzi's charge up there. Takes out a bit of that vulnerability. Now, Ranzi, with the revenge attack, has a nice big bar of energy to start with. Gets a double hit against the lower body, but Jixi effectively defending against the upper body. Takes one hit. It's always fun, I think, when you see a single hit come through on a Knight v Knight match. Most of the time that you block with a greatsword against a greatsword, you're going to block with both blades against both blades. But that's not the case if it's a very, very close block, because that's when sometimes you can let a hit come through. Jixi throws out a couple of range attacks and actually is able to clip Ranzi there with one of them, forces Ranzi to do a slightly early attack here, leaves some vulnerability on the table thanks to Jixi the Merciless's defense, who is now going to charge up themselves and go in on the attack. Ranzi wants to take out some of that vulnerability, possibly chooses to charge up, or no, maybe he's just charging up because their regen was already reset to 0, and they knew that Jixi was not ready to go in on the attack, so it was a safe charge up. A good call in that case. Some really interesting high-level choices, based on the energy management mechanics, this sort of like second-level tactical thinking from these players. Jixi using up all of their energy, not getting a ton of damage done, and now Ranzi gets to go in on the attack, able to take out a bit of vulnerability, only a little bit of extra damage there. And now, despite having this nice long melee attack, getting a few hits in and actually taking a lead. Jixi showing a ton of skill on defense earlier and actually had a slight lead, but now Ranzi has taken a bit of a lead, able to get those bits of damage. And I think that this might be one of those situations where what you saw earliest in the match with that very first back and forth isn't going to be what we see throughout the match, because these are high-level players and they have such an even matchup here and enough defensive capability. They have time to learn how the other person is playing and start to adapt to their style. Jixi now taking a slight lead in terms of health, just barely, but Ranzi is the one who's sitting on the big bar of energy. Jixi has been preferring the shorter attacks. Ranzi is the one who's now got the full bar of energy, going in for the longest. It's the most efficient use of energy. So in part, it sort of depends on whether you want to keep up a sense of pressure on the opponent, and also whether you really like that sort of first attack you get. So, there's a bit of an advantage to that very first attack coming out of fast motion into slow motion. Jixi chooses to charge up, try to get revenge, having taken a bit of extra damage. Able to get one hit in, but not a ton. Leaves some vulnerability left. But yeah, Ranzi chooses to charge up too, doesn't try to go after it. Jixi then charges up and tries to go after Ranzi's, but doesn't land the hit, meaning Ranzi's mana regeneration was not stopped. And so Ranzi got a bit of extra mana there from the momentum they had stored up. Jixi forced to charge up again and go in on the attack to get just a little 100 damage hit there. Jixi now on the back foot. Very different from what you would see from that first back and forth where Jixi seemed to have the upper hand. Ranzi now playing it patiently, waiting until they get almost a full bar of energy, and then going in to try to do a lot of damage at a time. This is one of those matches where a lot depends on sort of the difference between a perfect defense and an almost perfect defense. Yeah, Jixi effectively defending towards the end there, and then both players choosing to charge up. Ranzi throws out a quick ranged attack, but none of those projectiles hit. And now both players staring each other down. I think Jixi is choosing to copy a bit of what Ranzi is showing there, of waiting a little longer, trying to get the longer attacks. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but gets a nice big 600 damage shot against Ranzi. A couple of lower body hits, and yeah, a couple of good double hits there. Ranzi now slightly behind in terms of health, but significantly ahead in terms of energy. Jixi chooses to charge in again for another attack, but doesn't land the hits necessary. Ranzi keeps all of their health, doesn't take any extra vulnerability damage. Then with the extra energy goes in on the attack and is able to land a couple of double hits themselves against Jixie the Merciless. Jixie now absolutely on the back foot here. A lot of good defense, though. Jixie not just letting any of these hits go. Ramsey, though, has some upper hand, has the momentum, and knows it, is going in, trying to finish it off, but doesn't quite manage it. So that means Jixie, with a little bit of energy left, tries to go in and take out Ramsey's vulnerability. Ramsey doesn't let any of those hits through. So Ramsey maintains the advantage here, chooses to charge up with the rest of their health. Jixie needs an absolutely perfect defense and one last hit while Ramsey ran out of energy, is on the way back, able to just barely get Jixie with the tip of that sword. Jixie the Merciless goes down in the mirror match. At the very beginning of that match, that first exchange, I would have said that that was not how it was going to go. I would have guessed Jixie the Merciless was going to be taking this match based on the incredibly effective defense they showed. But Ramsey adapted, both players really adapting to each other over the course of this match. Yeah, Ramsey showing that they could pick up on that defense, really, not letting attacks through. And despite a really good play, good showing from Jixie the Merciless, Ramsey playing it patient and over time able to take the match there. Wow. Yeah, interesting and dramatic fight there. All right, it looks like Jixie the Merciless is choosing, interestingly, to switch to Duelist. Doesn't need to in this case. Could have chosen to stick with the Knight. But yeah, chooses to switch to something different, something that's got a shield on it and got a little bit more speed. Ramsey switching over to the Berserker. It's a classic choice for somebody who prefers Knight because, again, though it handles quite differently, in some way it's conceptually similar. You have the two hitboxes, big, slow, heavy weapon, does a lot of potential damage throughput. But we've actually seen Jixie the Merciless playing this matchup really effectively before. And so, I don't know, maybe this is a case where Jixie the Merciless said, you know what, if I'm going to fight a Berserker, I like my chances better as a duelist than I do as a Knight. This could be a counterpick, but it's hard to say. There's a lot of uncertainty, even if you're the player trying to make that choice. You don't know what the other player is going to do at any point here. I didn't expect that we would be seeing the duelist this early, but Jixie successfully taking a big chunk of damage out from Ramsey. Ramsey playing it patiently, like we saw in the previous match. That paid off for Ramsey big time. Jixie not playing patiently, charges up, goes in on the attack with only a little bit of energy left and successfully does some damage here. Basically heals up the remaining vulnerability, though, before Ramsey is able to go in on the attack. But Ramsey charges up, confident that they can do enough damage to heal that vulnerability, I think, because they have a full bar of energy, a nice big long melee attack. However, what we're seeing from Jixie the Merciless is that same strategy we saw from earlier, really aggressive blocks with the rapier against the handle of the Warhammer, effectively cutting off at least a third of the energy, the rest of it getting absorbed by the buckler, at least in some cases. However, Ramsey was able to get some good hits in, and now Ramsey chooses to charge up with the entirety of their health bar, leaving a ton of vulnerability. But I believe the idea here is, you can block the handle of my Warhammer with your rapier, but I'm going to destroy your buckler, and the head of this Warhammer is going to be able to come in and do some big damage. Able to do a fair amount of damage, but Jixie the Merciless still with a slight lead in terms of health. Ramsey can't be feeling good about that. This sort of strategy needs to do a ton of damage up front. So even though it looks like it's evened out, the amount of vulnerability left on Ramsey is no good for them. Jixie now able to come in and land a couple of hits, but they're doing twice as much damage as before, getting 500, 300 damage at a time on attacks that would have been doing half as much. Yeah, Ramsey, there it is, the headshot coming out for almost 800 damage from a rapier. That can't feel good. And the more time that passes, the more time Jixie has to recharge that buckler, which means that the super aggressive strategy, it needs to work at first. And if it doesn't, if it peters out like this, it means that Ramsey is really at a disadvantage. It's going to be tricky to see how they can pull back from this, if at all. An effective defense, though, only blocking almost all the hits there at the first half of that attack, then letting just 2 hits come through. A really surprisingly effective defense from the Berserker in this case. But Ramsey on the attack needs to combine that with an incredibly effective attack, but Jixi is not letting them. There's really, it's going to take both the effective defense and the effective attack. We saw the effective defense, I think, from Ramsey. We saw, very skillful, energetic defense here, choosing not to let great spin with the Warhammer there to block with the head. Yeah, really skillful, but needs to be able to somehow combine that with the super effective attacks. And I don't know if Jixi's going to let them. A perfect defense, I believe, there from Ramsey. Very effective. Jixi choosing to do little charge up and attacks, not effectively getting the hits in necessary, meaning Ramsey is keeping the energy momentum. This is one way to do it, I suppose, if you're able to block all of the hits coming out. Oh, and there it is, just one little hit. Ramsey chooses to charge up, takes a 200 damage hit from a ranged attack from Jixi. Smart move there from Jixi the Merciless. But Ramsey now, with the big bar of energy, going in, trying to get the really consequential attack, doing a ton of damage. Some of those hits are getting through, but they're coming through at 200 damage at a time or so. They're not big headshots. They're not against vulnerability because Jixi didn't leave any in this case. Yeah, Ramsey, I think, surprisingly effective from the point where I felt like the aggressive strategy petered out. I thought Ramsey was really just, the game was lost, and instead they're doing a ton of damage. And Jixi at this point has to be looking at that energy bar and feeling a little scared. But now Jixi charges up, has to really finish this off. Ramsey needs a perfect defense to prevent that from happening. Able to do so, takes a little bit of damage from going outside of their bounds, though. And so still has to attack right now. Their energy regeneration was still arrested. Able to get big hits in, though. Really only needs one more big hit with the hammer. Doesn't quite land it. Only able to get hits to the lower body, meaning Jixi is now absolutely on the back foot. Just needs either player one little hit. Able to get the hit, but Ramsey just had just enough damage. It was only 200 damage or so left. Oh my God. That is a surprising match. That was, I don't know if I've ever seen a Berserker come back from that situation where, they went for that super charge up aggressive strategy, got an entire bar of vulnerability, attacked and failed to gain the lead. The duelist in that case was allowed to bring back that shield. I thought Ramsey was done for, frankly, and shows how much I know. Gosh, yeah, that really proved me wrong. Incredible play from Ramsey, being able to hold on with the very effective defenses. Yeah, and not saying anything there against Jixi, because that is a situation where, just getting there, Jixi was showing an absolute command of the match, an incredibly effective defense over and over again against Ramsey's attacks. And it only started to soften at the very end, really, when Ramsey started to be able to, build up those big bars of energy, get the opportunity for the long melee attacks, and start landing enough hits to make it happen. And oh man, that, I swear to God, there is no mechanic in there that lets people survive. I always get accused of making it such that people can survive hits they shouldn't when it's a close match. There is nothing like that. I swear to anything. I swear upon my cats that there is nothing to cheat in those cases. If anything, it's just a matter of the way that the health bars are shown, where it becomes very difficult to see when there's just a little bit of health left, especially when you have video compression, and this is being streamed and stuff. But yeah, there's multiple times when I thought the match was over and somebody must have survived with, single digits of HP left. That was really something. Jixi the Merciless, taken out of the upper bracket now. Ramsey moving on to the finals. However, Jixi the Merciless is not going to have to fight that many battles to be able to make it back. Jixi the Merciless goes straight into the lower bracket semifinals, meaning that if Jixi can defeat one opponent, whoever it is that fights their way all the way up through the lower bracket, if they can beat that one opponent, then they get a rematch. And I'll be honest, there are some cases when we have a player who is so totally dominant that the rematch is almost a formality, where it's, the player, they won previously, we saw it happen, and they're probably going to win again. If I was Ramsey, I would not be sitting comfortably here. I'd be feeling really good about that last match, my God. But if Jixie the Merciless can get back to the finals and rematch Ramsey, I think that Ramsey is in serious danger because, yeah, Jixie has shown a ton of skill and in another world took that round. Absolutely. So let's see what happens here. We're going into a lower bracket round 4 match between Aw Yeah and Tear Blaster, previously known as the Gilded Gladiator. That's what I referred to them as, their Discord username in the bracket. And we have Tear Blaster on the Berserker, who we've seen used to good effect. Aw Yeah showing off the Crusader, which I am thrilled to see. We only got to see the tail end of a Crusader match previously. I would like to see all the classes sort of make their appearance here. I believe the only one we haven't seen now is Monk. Aw Yeah, on the attack. This is where it becomes very tricky for the Berserker because that Crusader, the flail, is really flipping around and is one of the most unpredictable weapons. And indeed, we're seeing the Tear Blasters having a hard time with the big, heavy weapon. Again, it's sort of like the Scythe, where if you have a long blocking weapon like a sword or like the handle of this Warhammer, it's something that you can use to block against slashing weapons like swords effectively. But if the attack is coming from a certain point, like the Scythe's blade, or like in this case, the Crusader's flail, it's very difficult to get your blocking weapon in just the right point. It's sort of like you're not just blocking, trying to align the axis in a certain way, but you actually need to get the right position on the forward backwards, axis to get it right. I don't know if I'm explaining that properly, but just imagine trying to block a flail ball with just this thin, little handle. Indeed, that's the trouble that we're seeing. Tear Blaster having a hard time blocking these hits, taking hits over and over again. Aw Yeah, playing really aggressively, choosing to charge up a lot and looking maybe to finish this fight quickly. Tear Blaster dropping their weapon for a second. I'm not sure if that was intentional or not. It might be that they're having some sort of technical trouble or something to that effect. Let's see. No, Aw Yeah, still going in on the next attack. Still has a fair amount of energy, only needs a couple more hits to finish it off, and indeed is able to get those hits that they needed. Aw Yeah takes the first round with the Crusader. I believe that was the first round, yeah. Tear Blaster, I also want to give a quick shout out, showing off some more of the new cosmetics that just came out in the Armory update that I'm quite a fan of. That is the Mercenary Armor, the Spring accent color, and the Crown Helm. Quite a nice outfit, I think. I almost said if I do say so myself, but I'm not going to take credit for assembling the outfit. I just think that it's nice to have a lot of these new cosmetics in the game. Okay, moving on to round 2. Interestingly, Tear Blaster choosing to pick up the Crusader that Aw Yeah is putting down. Aw Yeah switching into the Ninja. A couple of ranged attacks from Tear Blaster start us off, successfully blocked by Aw Yeah. Aw Yeah has a little bit of an easier time blocking the Crusader's flail than a Berserker would, able to get those Katars in different places, sort of get a little bit more coverage, and they're slightly wider than the handle of that Warhammer. Aw Yeah on the attack, and Tear Blaster having a somewhat difficult time blocking against it, or maybe I'm speaking too soon. Able to block a lot of the hits with the shield, and the shield holds up fairly well against the relatively weak attacks from the Katars. However, part of the difficulty is going to be maintaining the health of that shield over time and trying to get blocks with the flail. Because one of the special mechanics, this is sort of hidden in the tips menu in the game. When the Crusader hits, or is it rather blocks successfully with a flail, they regenerate a little bit of the health of the shield. And that's a weird mechanic. There's no real sort of physical explanation for it, but it's something that has always made sense in the mechanics in terms of balancing the classes and stuff. It's something where like high level play, a lot of the game becomes about successfully blocking with the flail, which is just a tricky thing to do in the best of times. Oh yeah, getting enough hits in to maintain a lead here. And if they can just keep doing this, can keep chipping away until Tear Blaster runs out of health, that's going to be enough to move forward. But playing aggressively, choosing to charge up entirely that health bar and firing a couple of extra shots, Tear Blaster just needs to hold on and has a little bit of energy left that might be used for an effective attack here. And yeah, Tear Blaster does hold on, not in too much danger of immediate death. All yeah left with a lot of vulnerability, and Tear Blaster chooses to go in on the attack, try to get those big double damage hits. Able to get one of them, but only one. Meaning All yeah has to be feeling good about the defense there. Hanging on. Okay, a couple of other bigger hits coming out at almost 500 damage from Tear Blaster. Can keep on trying to charge up and keep up those hits, but steps a little far forward and takes penalty damage for moving outside of their hitbox. Tear Blaster now sees the end coming and allows All yeah to chop off their head. That is the end of the match then. A good fight from Tear Blaster. I think effective use of the shield there, really holding out against the defense for a while. But All yeah, first with the Deadly Crusader, a really tough matchup, and then with that effective fast flurry of blows, Qatar hits, able to take the match 2-0. That means All yeah will be moving on to the lower bracket round 5 up against Gagilov, who we have seen fighting before. Also in round 5, JD Bradley versus Goon. All of these are now, at this point, going forward, players who we have seen fighting before. So this all tends to happen as the tournament narrows, where the ones who you've seen winning are the ones who are sticking around. And so of the 5 players who now remain in this tournament, 6 players, we have Ranzi, Jixie the Merciless, Gagilov, All yeah, JD Bradley, and Goon, all of whom we have seen fighting before, in many cases against each other. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. If we're going to get to see, for instance, more Crusader from All yeah, if we're going to see more Duelist from Jixie the Merciless, I'm curious to see what we might get. And not to mention Scourge coming from Goon, the only player who we've seen using that class so far. I'm curious if any of the matches that we didn't see included a monk game. Obviously, if the monk was only played by players who have dropped out of the tournament, then that's not really speaking for the class's effectiveness. But I'm curious if it can hold up at this level of play. Okay, I'm going to check the stream chat, see if there's any other questions for us. Knowledge Leaf says, is Ironlights 2 going to be PvE or PvP focused? Will it have both? It is going to be PvE focused. We made a design decision at some point that the main point of this game is 4-player co-op against NPCs. However, I really want to support PvP. The plan is to maintain support for PvP duels if players would like to do that. However, the limitation is going to be that it's probably not going to be as fair as Ironlights. There's going to be a lot of flexibility as to sort of what builds you can create. And it is possible that the mechanics of Ironlights 2 won't work as well for dueling as Ironlights 1. And to some extent, that's okay, because that's what Ironlights 1 is there for. It's there to provide the sort of this type of tournament, competitive style, fair play. HDMI Cord asks, what will be the actual name other than Ironlights 2? I honestly don't know. Okay, back into another match. We have All yeah versus Gagilov. And All yeah, granting my wish and showing us the monk. So that means that we have now seen every single class showing up in this tournament. Gagilov on the Reaper goes in on the first attack and lands a good number of hits here. This is another one of those situations where it's tricky to block against attack that's coming at a certain point, like the point of that scythe. If all you have is a relatively thin weapon, like that Monk's staff. Really, the only thing that's going to make it easier to block with is something broad like the shield of the Crusader. Oh yeah, on the attack, spinning that staff around and getting a significant number of hits, able to take, I believe, a slight lead here. Oh yeah, choosing to charge up, knowing that Gagilov doesn't have a ton of energy to retaliate with, but then not going to just take turns, goes in on the attack, lands a couple of hits, but still leaves some vulnerability on the table. Oh yeah, charges up slightly and then takes a bunch of hits to vulnerability. Several hits coming through, including almost 1,000 damage on the headshot. Huge damage against Oh yeah, meaning that Gagilov takes a slight lead here. Probably 10 or 15% of the health bar. Oh yeah, spinning that staff. Always a fan of that, I have to say. Gagilov threatening to send out some ranged attacks, and indeed does send one out to land at the same time as the melee attack. But that first hit, despite being blocked, is followed up by several more effective hits. Oh yeah, choosing to wait and charge up the energy here. Gagilov arguably is okay with that because it gives Gagilov time to recharge the shield bars that are on the handle of the scythe. But Oh yeah, I don't think is going for a pure, momentum play here. Instead, is trying to use the speed of the scythe to build up that damage throughput, and indeed successfully is landing a lot of hits here. Not a very effective defense, I think, coming from Gagilov, or at least not enough to stop Oh yeah from basically tying up the game. Oh yeah, firing a ranged attack there, keeping Gagilov on their toes, but takes a hit from Gagilov, who then immediately follows up with a melee attack. Usually it would be Oh yeah who's forced to start with the melee attack. Possibly Gagilov was expecting a quick charge up or something to that effect. Gagilov fires a ranged attack as Oh yeah comes in. Doesn't quite land it. Oh yeah, now trying to finish it off with a big melee attack. If they can get this last hit in, and yes, indeed, with a sliver of energy still remaining, Oh yeah was able to land the hits necessary, and that staff, despite us not seeing the monk showing up, I think that was a pretty effective play from the monk in this case. Oh yeah, very high damage throughput for what's usually considered a lighter character. The monk is an interesting class, and frankly, I wasn't surprised that we hadn't seen it up to this point, because it's a class that's really favored by newbies, statistically speaking. It's a class that, if you look at sort of the statistics split up by skill rating, you see that it's chosen a ton by lower ranked players and has a decent win rate, but its win rate and its pick rate decrease significantly as you go into the higher ranks, which suggests that there might be sort of a ceiling on how effective it can be. Maybe, though, that is not the case. Or at least not the whole story, because Oh yeah, very effective with the monk in this case. Gagilov sticking with the scythe here. Not sure what they banned, but Oh yeah is switched to the Katars and is choosing to charge up with the full bar of energy, try to charge up a big range attack. It does get automatically fired, though, when Gagilov goes in on the attack and goes wide. Gagilov using the scythe, it's one of I always am talking about how it's a difficult attack to block because of the shape of it, because it can sort of get around your defenses. Oh yeah, at the beginning of that attack, had pretty good defenses, and the Katars, they're not in the worst scenario of being able to be in two places at once, show a relatively broad cross section. But towards the end of the attack, more of those hits were coming through. So Gagilov does a fair amount of damage. Oh yeah, doing a sort of classic flurry of blows style, up and down. Hard to be in all places at once against that sort of thing. Oh yeah, interestingly, chooses to charge up an entire bar of energy. Gagilov at the tail end of that goes in on the attack and lands 3 big hits, 2 of them for over 500 damage each. Oh yeah, now ready to take their turn, goes in with almost a full bar of energy for the long melee attack. Possibly here, hoping to break through the shield bars, and if they can do so, that would leave Gagilov almost defenseless. So this might be that sort of momentum play that we usually see coming out from, for instance, a knight. Gagilov on the back foot, a little bit behind in terms of health, but seeing a ton of vulnerability on Oh yeah, chooses to go in on the attack, get some good hits in, but leave some vulnerability left on themselves. And with presumably a broken down shield bar, that might mean, oh, never mind whatever I was saying there. All Yeah charges up and gets a rare big hit with a charged up range attack for 800 damage. Gagelof, seeking revenge, goes in for a huge melee attack, gets several hits in a row against All Yeah's vulnerability, and takes out a huge chunk of damage, taking the lead again. Really dramatic back and forth as this match progresses. All Yeah, continuing with the flurry of blows style, able to take out some health from Gagelof, but Gagelof chooses to charge up, feeling relatively safe, knowing that there's not much energy left on All Yeah. And both players, as they charge up, they're sort of encouraging their opponent to come in and attack. All Yeah, now with just a sliver of health, needs to be able to block almost every single hit here. But Gagelof swings the scythe low, gets in under that defense, and takes out All Yeah at the shoulder, taking round 2, which means that this is now a 1-1 match. If I'm not mistaken, this might be the first time that we're going to a round 3 in one of these matches. Despite some really close matches that we've seen before, this might be the first time that it's actually gone to a third game. On stream, that is. Okay, we might be having a bit of connection issues. We'll see what happens here. But going on to round 3, yeah, it looks like they might be putting the headset down to communicate bans, Prox tells me. Okay, yeah, looks like we're still connected to this match, so it sounds like the bans are communicated and we get to move on to round 3 for all the marbles. We can see on the bracket on screen right now, JD Bradley versus Goon went to Goon, who will now be going on to the lower bracket quarterfinals, let's call it. Gagelof versus All Yeah continues with Gagelof on the Duelist, All Yeah switching to the Knight. Both classes that we have not seen coming out from either player. So All Yeah, perhaps knowing that Gagelof would be able to guess, or would be guessing that there was going to be a ninja pick, pardon me, switches to something totally different, switches to the Knight, a heavy weapons class. So possibly the plan there was a sort of bait, saying, well, Gagey, like you think that I'll stick with ninja, then I'm going to switch out of that. But possibly not. Possibly the ninja was what was banned there. All right. Gagey on the attack, able to land a couple of hits, but not at the pace necessary to try to match what All Yeah has put out in that first melee attack. All Yeah has the momentum play now as a possible move, because Gagelof is going to be depending on their buckler to do a lot of defense. And that buckler, you can see, is down to the size of a walnut. All Yeah choosing to charge up, takes a little hit from a ranged attack there, but mostly just charges up and tries to go in on the attack. Can break down that buckler to basically nothing. Still some really effective defense coming out, but once that's gone, All Yeah, still choosing to charge up. And actually, All Yeah is holding back a little bit. Oh, nope, spoke too soon. There is the attack. There still might be a little bit left now on that buckler. The momentum may have sort of petered out, as we saw before, once in that upper bracket match with Ramsey. So, yeah, it's questionable sort of whether that play is over or not. Ooh, huge headshot there from All Yeah, doing about 1,000 damage. That's 10% of the health bar right there. A tricky situation here. All Yeah, I think, definitely has the upper hand. At this point, might not care about running out of momentum. Maybe the buckler's back. Maybe it's not. But as long as All Yeah can get enough damage to finish things off, they've got to be feeling good about it. Gagelof, with a more effective attack here, getting several hits to the lower body, which are doing significant damage thanks to the vulnerability that All Yeah has incurred. They would be doing half as much, but they're doing, say, 300 damage apiece. Gagelof, gesturing there, I'm not sure exactly what they were communicating, but All Yeah plants the greatsword into the ground, then goes in on the attack and is able to get just enough hits to finish the round 3 in their favor. All Yeah, showing off the crown helm, gives a salute and takes the match. Well played from Gagelof. It was great seeing a lot of rounds from Gagelof throughout this tournament, including a winning round at the very beginning against Goon. So this might be one of those rock, paper, scissors things where, you can't tell, like, what would have happened if Goon was, to rematch, or Goon was to face All Yeah directly. But All Yeah is the one who's going to be moving on to the lower bracket semifinals to face Goon. And it'll be interesting to see what classes they pick, because we've seen, I don't want to say weird, but the less common classes coming out from both of them, Goon showing off the Scourge, and All Yeah showing off the Crusader, Ninja, and Monk in equal measure, finishing it off with an effective Knight, though. So yeah, I'm very curious to see what they're going to choose to play here. Until then, we're going to give them a moment to catch their breath, because at this point, we know what the set of matches is going to be. We have All Yeah versus Goon, then the winner of that faces Jixie the Merciless, and then the winner of that faces Ramsey. So we got to give them a moment to catch their breath and get into the next fight. In the meantime, I'm going to be flipping back to the stream chat. Please post any questions that you might have for me, and I'll see if I can answer. Yeah, so last question was, what will be the name other than Ironlights 2? Yeah, it's still totally up in the air. Maybe it'll be Ironlights 2. Probably it'll be something totally different. Maybe it'll start with iron as a prefix to, sort of show the lineage or not. Or maybe it'll just be something totally different. I couldn't tell you at this point. B suggests that not being able to cast spells without getting a mentor to teach you would be awesome for community stuff. Interesting thought. I see what you mean there. Yeah, I don't know, though, if, like, I feel like community stuff, we have other ideas for trying to incentivize community building, and, like, people sort of acting as mentors and things like that. There's a lot of opportunity for that, especially with a co-op game that's, a 4-player thing. Finding ways to incentivize experienced players to team up with newbies and kind of show them the ropes. And also, especially being able to, like, find teams that you really work well with, stick with them, see them across multiple games, etc. But that in particular, I feel like I don't want to do anything that makes it so that you really have to engage with the community, or else, something's totally locked off from you. So the spells, they'll be available for anyone to sort of learn independently. But, I wonder if there's something that we can do for sort of like having stuff that, gets passed naturally, mouth to mouth, and, see how that goes. All right, so let's see. Any other questions that we have? Kai accuses me of having a last hit mechanic. I swear there's nothing to that effect. If it's there, it's a total bug, but I think it's just a display thing about how the HP bars are shown. It gets into that corner, and there might be a couple of pixels where there's health, but it's, not even visible. But everybody has the same, I swear. Let's see, any other questions? HDMI cord says, can there be a helmet for PTB testers, like a hard hat or something funny? Oh, I kind of like that idea of having like a hard hat for people who are like, in construction build. I mean, it's possible. The only thing I'd want to be sure of is that I don't repeat the bug that I accidentally introduced at the tail end of the Armory update, where I put in something that only PTB testers could see, but then it was, what do you call it? It broke the game for the people who didn't actually have it in game. So maybe what I could do is either just make it visible to everyone, or make it, what do you call it? Something that, it shows up differently, just shows up as like a standard helm for somebody else. But I don't think I want to encourage people to join the PTB just so that they can get access to a cosmetic. There's a risk to joining the PTB, and I don't want to put the incentive in the wrong place. All right, back to the match. We have Goon versus All Yeah. Goon starting us off on the Scourge. All Yeah sticking with what won him the last round, the Knight. Goon flipping those whips around. Both players letting the energy charge up for a moment. And All Yeah goes in for the first attack. Able to get a couple of hits, and there's a nice 400 damage whip crack. There's now, unlike previously, a sort of cooldown on the whip crack. So you can't just do one after another, but mixing it in is an effective way to get some bonus damage in. All Yeah now taking their turn. We're going to see if Goon is able to defend effectively against this. Having the two whips does mean that you can successfully block a Knight's Greatsword. And indeed, we're seeing some of that, some perfect blocks coming out from Goon. But especially early in the attack, several hits were getting through. And it's actually a fairly close match at the end of that first encounter. Oh, Aya goes in for a quick attack and gets a 600 damage hit on a headshot there. Goon can't feel good about that. Aya, again, with the attack, the first attack coming out from after starting a melee attack can be a little faster, and so Aya able to land those hits a little bit better. Goon, deciding they want revenge, goes in with just a flurry of really fast attacks, able to land enough hits to take the lead from Aya. Aya, again, choosing to charge up and go for a quick attack, doing enough damage from that to be able to heal the vulnerability that they incur. But Goon sees Aya with very little energy left, and so chooses to charge up, get a little bit of free energy of their own, knowing that there's not going to be an effective retaliation. Goon back on the attack, taking back a lead of around, say, 20% of that health bar or so. That's about